Hey guys, if you like my videos, please like and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it, thanks. Ethan Lowe knew the sky. He had been stargazing since childhood, tracing constellations like old friends, measuring the moon's phases with an instinctive certainty. It was his ritual, stepping onto the balcony every night, telescope at the ready, cataloging the shifting heavens. That's why, on the night it appeared, he knew something was wrong. The second moon was faint at first, barely more than a pale smudge in the sky, but Ethan felt it before he saw it. A creeping unease, a pressure in his skull that made him blink twice before his brain could process what he was looking at. It was wrong. The shape wasn't quite right, not a perfect sphere like the real moon, but something subtly misshapen like an uneven lump of clay. The light it gave off wasn't the silver glow of reflected sunlight, but something duller, tinged with a sickly, almost fleshy hue. He rubbed his eyes, adjusted the focus of his telescope. No mistake. It was there. Yet when he mentioned it to his sister over the phone, she laughed. A second moon? What, like a sci-fi movie? You sure you're not just seeing Venus or something? His friends, too, dismissed it. There's only one moon, dude. You okay? He checked space forums, science articles. Nothing. No announcements of new celestial phenomena. No news of a rogue asteroid caught in Earth's gravity. But it was there. That creeping unease pressed in on him, whispering doubts. Maybe he was mistaken. Maybe he was tired. Then he pointed his telescope at it, and his blood ran cold. The second moon wasn't static. It was moving. Not like the natural, predictable path of the real moon, but with something deliberate. A slow, lurching drift that seemed to pull the space around it in strange, imperceptible ways. He stared at it for so long that his eyes burned. Finally, he grabbed his phone and aimed the camera at the sky. Snap! He checked the screen. Nothing. Only the real moon hung in the photograph, a single lone presence in the void. The second moon wasn't there. Ethan swallowed. A chill ran through him. When he looked back through the telescope, the second moon seemed just a little bit closer. Ethan's hands felt clammy as he checked the photo again. He scrolled through older images of the sky, hoping for some sign that the second moon had been there before. Nothing. His chest tightened. He wasn't imagining this. He couldn't be. He tried again, switching to video mode, aiming his phone at the sky. The second moon was faintly visible on the screen this time, flickering like a bad signal. His pulse steadied. Maybe it was some kind of atmospheric distortion, something his camera struggled to process. Then the feed cut to static. Ethan frowned. His phone had never done that before. He tapped the screen. The static cleared for a second, and he glimpsed something beneath the second moon's surface. Not craters, not rock, veins, a lattice of thin, pulsing lines, shifting beneath the surface as though something alive was pressed just beneath the skin. Then the feed cut out entirely. His phone restarted on its own. A wave of nausea rolled over him. He exhaled shakily and glanced at his watch. 10:23 p.m. That wasn't right. The last time he checked, it had been 10:10. 12 minutes. Gone. He scrolled through his phone's video gallery. The footage he had just taken wasn't there. The last saved video was from yesterday. His stomach twisted into knots. Ethan grabbed his laptop and set up a live video stream, pointing the camera at the second moon. This time, he left the room, not wanting to interfere. When he returned 10 minutes later, the screen was black. The recording had stopped on its own. He dragged the playback bar to where the video had cut out. The last thing captured was the second moon flickering, its shape subtly wrong, like it was trying to settle into something else. Then, just before the cut to black, a single frame remained, a shape on his balcony. Ethan's throat clenched. He rewound, paused. There, just behind the railing, stood a figure. The resolution was poor, distorted by the failing camera, but he could still make out the features. It was him, Ethan, standing on his own balcony, staring up at the second moon. Ethan shoved the laptop away, his pulse hammering against his ribs. He scrambled onto the balcony, breath fogging in the night air, expecting what? His own doppelganger standing where he had seen it in the video. Some impossible figure waiting for him in the dark? Nothing. The street below was empty. The wind stirred the leaves. His apartment windows reflected his pale face, wide eyes darting between shadows. He forced himself to turn his gaze skyward. The second moon was still there, closer. Its pale, fleshy surface was more distinct now, and the strange lattice of veins, if that's what they were, throbbed beneath the surface, subtly shifting, like something was pressing against the inside of it. Ethan shuddered. For the first time he noticed the hum, a low, vibrating frequency that settled deep into his skull, something felt rather than heard. It reminded him of a power line humming in the distance, except this noise pulsed, matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. He backed away from the railing, heart hammering. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. He needed proof. Grabbing his old DSLR from a shelf, Ethan adjusted the settings, switched to manual focus. If his phone couldn't capture the second moon, maybe the camera could. Click. He checked the screen. Nothing. He swallowed, hands tightening around the camera, adjusted the exposure, clicked again, still nothing. He tried long exposure photography, hoping the light would register over time. He snapped picture after picture, but in every single frame the sky looked normal, just the real moon, nothing else. Ethan gritted his teeth. He knew what he saw, and yet his own tools, his own reality were denying it. A terrible thought wormed its way into his mind. What if the second moon wasn't supposed to be seen? What if it was something that didn't belong here, something that only he, for some reason, could perceive? He looked back through the telescope, adjusting the focus with shaking fingers. The second moon was bigger now, its surface trembling slightly like something inside was waiting, pressing forward. And for the briefest, most horrifying moment, it twitched. Ethan barely slept. When he finally collapsed into bed, exhaustion dragging him under, his dreams were filled with strange, fractured images, shifting shadows, a great pale eye blinking in slow, deliberate movements. He woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, with no memory of the dream itself, just the distinct sensation of being watched. By morning he almost convinced himself he had imagined it all. Lack of sleep, a trick of the light. But when the sun dipped beneath the horizon that evening and he stepped onto his balcony once more, the second moon was still there, closer. It wasn't just its size that had changed. The night itself felt different, off. The streetlights flickered at uneven intervals. They would buzz to life for a few moments before dimming too much, casting the road in elongated, warped shadows that didn't quite match the shapes of the objects that made them. He saw his neighbor, an older man named Douglas, walking his dog. Ethan waved. Douglas lifted a hand in greeting, but his smile came too late, like there was a lag between his action and his expression. Ethan's stomach churned. Then he noticed the stars. Near the second moon, the constellations were wrong. Not missing, just warped. Some seemed stretched toward the pale, fleshy orb, as though being pulled by an invisible force. Others had taken on impossible angles, their familiar formations twisting into something alien. His breath hitched as he glanced down at his own shadow on the balcony. It moved, not with him, after him. A fraction of a second delay, like his reflection was lagging behind reality. A deep unease settled into his bones. He turned sharply, stepping back inside. In the kitchen, he poured himself a glass of water, trying to steady his nerves. He glanced at the digital clock on the stove, 9:48 p.m. He took a sip, rubbed his tired eyes, and checked again. 9:45 p.m. His breath caught, his hands trembled. The time was moving backward. Something was wrong with the world. Ethan felt his skin crawl as he slowly turned his head toward the hallway mirror. His reflection stood there, still, not matching his movements. Then, slowly, it smiled. Ethan's breath hitched. His reflection shouldn't be smiling, because he wasn't. His own face was pale, slack-jawed, frozen in fear. But in the glass, his reflection's lips curled upward, stretching just a little too wide. His stomach twisted. His legs felt heavy, like he was sinking into the floor. Then the reflection's eyes blinked, not in sync with his. A slow, deliberate movement. Ethan took a step back. His reflection stayed where it was for a fraction of a second before catching up, mimicking his motion too late. A cold wave of nausea rolled through him. This was wrong. It was as if the glass no longer reflected light, but something else entirely, something that was only pretending to be him. He swallowed hard. "This isn't real," he whispered. "I'm overtired, stressed." But his reflection's lips moved a second after he spoke, like a badly dubbed film. Ethan's chest seized. He turned away, heading for his bedroom, but he couldn't resist one last glance. His reflection wasn't moving anymore. It just stood there, watching him. Then, in the dead silence of his apartment, his reflection's lips moved. No sound came out, but Ethan could read the words perfectly. "It's almost here." A violent shiver ran through him. He squeezed his eyes shut and stumbled into his room, slamming the door behind him. His breath came in short, panicked bursts. His skin was damp with cold sweat. This is stress, a hallucination, a waking dream. "I've been staring at the sky too long, not sleeping enough. This isn't real." His pulse hammered in his ears. But outside, in the hall, something shifted. Not a footstep, not a knock. A barely audible scrape like fingertips dragging down glass. He didn't check the mirror again. Ethan curled up in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the phantom weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him. He told himself he wouldn't look outside again tonight. But when he finally drifted into a restless sleep, he dreamed of two moons, one high above and one pressed against his window, watching him breathe. Ethan left town the next morning. He told himself it wasn't running, it was just distance. Perspective. A way to clear his head, to prove that the world wasn't unraveling. The drive took longer than it should have. His GPS glitched out twice, losing signal on roads that had never caused problems before. The car's digital clock flickered strangely, cycling through times that had already passed. 9:12 a.m., then 9:03 a.m., then 9:15 a.m., before settling on a frozen display. 9:48 a.m., the same time he had seen on his kitchen clock the night before. He turned it off, drove without it. Eventually, he reached a small roadside town, a quiet, unremarkable place, the kind of spot where gas stations doubled as diners and locals sat outside, watching traffic like it was their version of television. Ethan parked, stepping out under the dull mid-morning light. The sky felt wrong today, too low. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake the feeling. Inside the gas station, the air smelled of old coffee and stale motor oil. The cashier, a thin man with watery blue eyes, gave him a slow, too wide smile. Ethan hesitated. "Hey," he said, forcing normalcy into his voice. "I was wondering if you could do me a favor. Could you, look at the sky for a second?" The man's smile didn't move. "I can certainly do that," he said, his voice like static over a radio. But he didn't move, didn't even glance toward the windows. Ethan clenched his jaw. He turned, gesturing outside. "Seriously, just look. Tell me what you see up there." The cashier's head tilted too far to the side, vertebrae cracking faintly. His grin widened, teeth slightly too small, too numerous. "What a beautiful night," he said. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "It's daytime." The cashier just smiled, didn't blink. Ethan took a slow step back, his stomach churned. Outside, the few people on the sidewalk stood too still. Not frozen, just delayed. A woman drinking coffee raised the cup to her lips, but for a fraction of a second it hung motionless in the air before reaching her mouth. A passing truck moved in stuttered increments, like frames of a corrupted video file. And the worst part, no one noticed. Ethan turned and walked out of the store, his pulse hammering in his ears. He didn't look back, didn't stop. And as he pulled onto the highway, speeding away from the town that didn't remember, he made the mistake of glancing in his rearview mirror. The cashier was still standing in the gas station doorway, still smiling, still watching. Ethan drove for hours, but it didn't help. The sky was wrong, no matter where he went. By the time he got home, exhaustion dragged at his limbs. His chest felt tight, his thoughts slow and unsteady. He parked in his driveway, but didn't move, hands gripping the wheel, staring straight ahead. The silence pressed against his ears. He shouldn't look up, but he did. The second moon dominated the sky. It was massive now, larger than it had ever been, hanging too low, suffocating the night. But the worst part wasn't its size. It was the light. It wasn't reflecting sunlight like the real moon. It glowed from within. And as Ethan stared at it, something stared back. It wasn't just a moon. It was a thing, a presence. A deep thrumming pressure filled his skull, like his brain was vibrating inside his skull. Then a voice, not spoken but felt, sinking into his mind like wet fingers pressing against his thoughts. "We are watching," Ethan gasped, stumbling out of his car. The moment he broke eye contact with the moon, the pressure eased, but his knees nearly buckled. His stomach lurched like he'd been spinning in place for too long. He staggered toward his apartment, fumbling with his keys. As he shoved the door open, the television in the living room flickered to life on its own. White noise, static, a broken, warbling voice hidden beneath the hiss, whispering words he almost understood. He rushed forward and shut it off. His own breath was the only sound in the room now. Ethan stood in the dim light, pulse thrumming in his ears. His skin felt stretched too tight, his bones aching with something old and wrong. Outside, the second moon pulsed. He felt it without looking, like the heartbeat of something enormous and alive, something that knew him. And for the first time, Ethan truly understood. This wasn't just a moon, it was a door, and it was getting ready to open. Ethan woke up outside. He wasn't in his bed, not even in his apartment. He was lying in his backyard, face down in the dirt, his shirt damp with cold sweat. His breath came in ragged gasps, his fingers curled into the soil. His bare feet were caked in mud and blood. A ringing filled his skull. Not a noise, but a presence, fading as he became fully awake. He sat up too fast. His vision blurred, his head pounding. His hands were shaking. What happened? The last thing he remembered was... His stomach dropped. He didn't remember going to sleep. Heart hammering, he dug his phone out of his pocket. 4:12 a.m. No missed calls, no texts, except for one sent from his own number at 1:37 a.m. "It's me, don't trust the other one." A chill rolled down his spine. His hands were dirty, scratched. His nails had dark streaks under them, like he had been clawing at something. He staggered to his feet, mind racing. Did I sleepwalk? Black out? Was I drugged? Then he saw them. Footprints, leading away from where he had woken up. Not his own, they were too deep, the spacing too long, as if someone had been running. And they weren't alone. A second set of prints ran parallel to them, following the exact same path. Identical. Panic tightened his throat. He followed them with his eyes, pulse hammering. The footprints went to the edge of his yard, then stopped abruptly. No turn, no return prints. Whoever, or whatever, had left them was just gone. Ethan backed away, his hands shaking. His mind was a mess of half-formed thoughts. He needed proof, something solid. He opened his photo gallery, scrolling back through the night. Maybe he had taken a picture. Left himself a clue, but the last photo in his camera roll was from yesterday afternoon. All his pictures from last night, hundreds of them, were gone, erased. The second moon loomed above him, massive, watching. Something was getting closer, and it was taking pieces of him away. Ethan barely slept. The next day passed in a haze, work, traffic, phone calls, all of it distant, unreal, like a bad dream he wasn't waking from. Every time he blinked, he expected to open his eyes somewhere else, sometime else, missing another chunk of his life. But when night fell, the illusion of normalcy shattered. The second moon was closer than ever. It didn't just hang in the sky anymore, it pressed down the way storm clouds felt before a tornado, low, heavy, electric, and worse, it had changed. It pulsed, its surface shifting, veins of dark light crawling across it like cracks in glass. Ethan's skin prickled, his stomach churned. He wasn't supposed to be seeing this. Outside, the world had started to break. Buildings didn't look quite right, edges sharper, shadows stretched at wrong angles. Streetlights flickered offbeat, some strobing too fast, others frozen in place like a paused video. The stars near the second moon warped, pulled toward it as if being devoured. And then there were the people. Ethan walked outside, gripping his phone like a lifeline. A man on the sidewalk stood perfectly still, staring straight up at the second moon. His face was blank, no expression, no recognition when Ethan passed. A woman walked across the street, her head twitching too quickly to the side, like she was caught in two frames of reality. And then Ethan saw himself, standing at the end of the street, watching his own face, his own stance, his own clothes. The other Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. He just stared. Ethan's blood ran cold. He took a slow step forward, pulse hammering. The other him tilted his head, not like a person but like a bird, an approximation of movement rather than something natural. Ethan's breath came fast, shallow, his muscles tensed, his phone vibrated. A new text. Unknown number. Don't look at it. Don't let it see you looking. His throat tightened. When he looked up again, the other him was gone, and above him the second moon split open, a thin, jagged line running through its center, like the beginning of a tear in fabric. The sky itself was coming apart. Ethan ran. He didn't know where, only that he had to move, had to get away before what? His own footsteps sounded wrong, too many of them. The city had emptied. No cars, no voices, just the soft electric hum of flickering streetlights. Shadows stretched in strange directions, warping as he passed. The air felt thick, heavy with something unseen. He reached his apartment and slammed the door behind him, chest heaving. The second moon's light bled through the windows, casting the walls in an unnatural glow. He turned, heart hammering, and froze. His reflection was waiting for him. Not in the bathroom mirror, not in a puddle, but standing in the middle of the room. It was him, but not him. It didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then slowly its mouth curved into a grin Ethan had never made in his life. He staggered backward, but his double stepped forward, moving with slow, deliberate precision. Outside, the second moon cracked further open, spilling light that wasn't light, a color that had no name. Ethan's head pounded. His double raised a hand, not in threat, in offering, and behind him in the mirror something else moved. Shapes, shadows, things that shouldn't be. Pressing forward, reaching, waiting. A voice crawled into his skull. It's time to choose. Ethan gritted his teeth. The second moon pulsed, the crack widening, a doorway opening. His double extended its hand further, that too-wide grin never faltering. And then it stepped toward him. The world buckled, the mirror rippled like water. The apartment walls folded in on themselves. Ethan lurched backward, slamming into the wall. The air thickened, pressing against him like invisible hands, holding him in place. The second moon's glow seeped through the walls, casting everything in a sickly, shifting light. His double stepped closer, hand still outstretched. The room wasn't right anymore. The walls breathed, expanding and contracting like lungs. The door to his bedroom stretched too tall, its frame bending at unnatural angles. The floor pulsed under his feet, soft as flesh, then hard as stone. It's time to choose, the voice whispered again. The mirror warped, its surface rippling. Things moved inside it, dark twisted figures pressing against the glass, their hands clawing, their mouths opening in silent screams. His double took another step forward. Ethan's breath came fast, sharp. His own face stared back at him, same jawline, same eyes, but wrong. The thing wearing his skin tilted its head in that unnatural bird-like way. The crack in the second moon widened, a door, a wound, a threshold, and something on the other side was waiting. The pressure around Ethan intensified. His mind screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. "Come with me," his double said. The voice was his own, but layered beneath it was something else, something vast, cold, ancient. Ethan clenched his jaw. "What happens if I do?" His double smile widened. "Then you'll understand." The mirror shuddered, cracking at the edges. The figures behind the glass pressed harder, their forms becoming clearer. They were all him. Dozens, hundreds, all Ethan, some with missing eyes, some with too many fingers, some laughing, some screaming, some standing eerily still. "You've already crossed once," the double said. "You just don't remember." Ethan's pulse thundered. Something deep inside him twisted. A memory he couldn't quite reach, something clawing at the edges of his mind. The second moon pulsed, beating like a heart. His reflection raised its hand one last time. "Come home." And behind him, the mirror shattered.